All right, let's dive in. We've got PDC complaints piling up with two new grievances this week. One is filed by radio host Ari Hoffman, but not in his capacities, not using, his position at KVI. He's filing as a private citizen. And this is directed at the Seattle Times and related foundations, alleging that the publication may have crossed the line from journalism into reportable campaign activity related to coverage of the No on 2117 campaign. Again, 2117 was the initiative on the fall ballot in 2024 that asked voters, do you want to keep the Climate Commitment Act? Do you want to repeal it? Ultimately, voters decided to keep the Climate Commitment Act. But were they swayed in any way by some of the coverage from the Seattle Times and their Climate Lab and Seattle Foundation and some of these other funded organizations that wrote multiple articles in the Times and their editorial board as well? So here is part of my conversation about the PDC complaint filed by Ari Hoffman. I talked to him last evening.
So the Climate Commitment Act was the people who were working to keep it in place were groups like the Seattle Foundation. And those groups are the same ones who fund the Climate Lab in the Seattle Times. The Seattle Times has been losing subscribers for years. The way they're staying afloat is they get these donors to pay for these special sections, the Climate Lab, the Education Lab, Project Homeless. So the people who are sponsoring this thing in the Seattle Times are also the ones behind the opposition to repealing the Climate Commitment Act, which, don't forget, spiked our gas prices by a huge, huge amount. So if they're paying for this thing and they're working on the campaign, they're basically, most people don't look at the fine print that say that this is paid for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Seattle Foundation or whichever one is funding whichever one of these specifics. They don't look at that. They just see an article in the Seattle Times. But worse than that, one of these groups was putting the content in the Seattle Times so then they could push it out for the campaign of, look what the Seattle Times says. So this was all undisclosed campaign contributions. And I think that's a much stronger case than the one that was filed against Brandi Kruse and Let's Go Washington.
So he was referring there at the end to the May 12th complaint, May 12th of this year, that was filed by Washingtonians for Ethical Government and that organization's communications liaison, Pam Stewart, against Let's Go Washington. We've talked a lot about this over the last week or so. Pam Stewart alleges that podcaster Brandi Kruse's support for Let's Go Washington initiatives amounts to advertising for the organization, like a campaign donation. And, she suggests it needs to be reported um, as such for campaign donation purposes. So the other complaint, it was filed just today, just this morning by Arthur West, and it's directed back at Washingtonians for Ethical Government and their staff members, including Pam Stewart, accusing that organization, which defines itself as a watchdog group, of failing to register as a political committee with the PDC, despite years, he says, of active activity directed specifically at defeating conservative ballot measures and supporters. That's really what they go after. They have targeted Tim Eyman in the past, or Andrew Villeneuve, their president, has targeted Tim Eyman in the past and some of his initiatives going back many, many years. So he is suggesting, Arthur West is suggesting in this complaint that really, this stuff needs to be reported and that they need to be investigated. As I mentioned in the opening, West is the same guy who is behind the current appeal before the state Supreme Court, no decision, to the Public Investment Impact Disclosure Statement written by AG Nick Brown's office that will appear next to the income tax repeal attempt on the fall ballot. That's I-645. So the contention from Arthur West and others who've challenged the PIID is that it's inaccurate. It's, not informing voters of the right thing. So they've been challenging that. And again, that's an appeal that is currently before the state Supreme Court for consideration. There have been a number of legal filings, both in support of West's appeal and from groups opposing that. And then the way these things all work, then, they file the amicus brief, say it's in support of it. Then another group gets to come back and file a legal brief that says, this is why we think This is a bogus, amicus brief. Of course, I'm simplifying it because I'm not an attorney, obviously. So let me give you a little bit more about Hoffman's complaint, Ari Hoffman's complaint against the Seattle Times. He says it's 16 pages, by the way, and he says that they've been bankrolled by Climate Lab and produced content with the exact messaging of the No on 2117 campaign. So he suggests the coverage amounted to what should have been reportable campaign activity under state law. And he names, I want to read this so I don't miss any. He names the Seattle Times, the Seattle Foundation, Clean and Prosperous Washington, Clean and Prosperous Institute, Green Jobs PAC, and the No on 2117 committee. Again, alleging that all those groups failed to disclose the commercial equivalent um, for all the articles that encourage people to support the No on 2117 campaign. Don't support this initiative. So, according to the Seattle Times, I want to share a little bit more about what Climate Lab is. And this is right off of the Seattle Times page. It says Climate Lab is a Seattle Times initiative that explores the effects of climate change in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The project illuminates the impacts of heat waves, drought, wildfire, flooding, and examines government and industry actions to help the public better understand how greenhouse gas emissions are changing our lives. Now, I want to note that I reached out today to the Seattle Times, to Seattle Foundation, to Clean and Prosperous Washington, seeking comment on the complaint. Thus far, I've received no response. My article yet to be published, but if in fact I receive a response from them today ahead of publication, I will certainly include any comment from them since they are the ones named in the complaint. Now, Ari Hoffman took note of the fact that last week the Public Disclosure Commission advanced a complaint that was filed last May against Let's Go Washington and Brandi Kruse to what they call kind of the next phase, the formal investigation phase. Makes it seem like the commission believes there could be some merit to the complaint. Otherwise, like many others in the past, they could have just dismissed it or said, really, this thing's a nothing burger and there's nothing to look into. But they are moving forward with it. And after that news came out late last week, a couple of the big TV stations downtown jumped all over it. And before they even reached out to Cruz or Let's Go Washington for comment, since they're the ones named in the complaint, they just ran with the story and went, it almost made it seem like it was a new complaint. And, that received a lot of pushback from Brandi Kruse and Brian Haywood of Let's Go Washington. So what happened yesterday when Ari Hoffman came out with his big PDC complaint against the Seattle Times?
I have gotten no response back from them at all. I haven't heard from them at all. And in fact, what's interesting to me is you might remember how breathlessly the media covered the PDC complaint against Brandi Kruse and Let's Go Washington. So far, the only outlets I have heard from today is the Center Square, the Linwood Times, and the Seattle Stranger. I remember people in a certain newsroom that you and I both know very well breathlessly running, oh my God, there's a PDC complaint against Brian Haywood and Brandi Kruse, and we have to cover this right away. Nothing like that here. I haven't heard from any of the TV outlets. I haven't heard from the Seattle Times, probably because they're named in the complaint. But the question is, will they actually even cover this thing as breathlessly as they covered the one against Let's Go Washington and Brandi Kruse?
Okay, so just briefly, again, a little bit more on West's page, a complaint, which is 6 pages. Got ahead of myself there. The PDC complaint against Washingtonians for ethical government. He is alleging that their president, Andrew Villeneuve, he says it's an organization, Washingtonians for ethical government's not a neutral watchdog. He describes it this way: it is a rabid partisan attack dog that weaponizes the PDC and orchestrates media campaigns exclusively against conservative initiatives and their sponsors. And he included multiple examples for asking the PDC to look into them. And we'll put a couple of these up. One of them, he said that, WAFEG's May 12th complaint against Let's Go Washington was personally filed by Pam Stewart. He notes the fact she is a sitting Samama City Council member in her capacity as WAFEG's communications liaison. He asked them to look into whether or not she's using an elected office potentially to expend public resources or lend institutional weight to what is, in substance, opposition research against a political adversary. Um, so again, there are a number, I think he's got like 12 or 14 different exhibits that he included in his 6-page complaint to the PDC. So that was just issued today. Nothing back from the PDC yet. These things don't really have a timeline other than initially after filing 90 days for them to decide if they're going to advance it or not. Although he's asking them to expedite everything right now because, of course, we've got 3 Let's Go Washington initiatives on the ballot this fall. This bad press, as he puts it, for Let's Go Washington, he thinks is unwarranted and he wants it resolved basically to clear them of any wrongdoing and to show maybe that Washingtonians for Ethical Government is not really an unbiased watchdog group as they claim to be. So, one more quick clip here from Brian Haywood of Let's Go Washington, because he says the issue of journalists or influencers like Brandi Kruse talking about these issues publicly or in a podcast form like we do here at Washington in Focus Daily. He says this has already been decided in a case um, years ago that involved KVI talk show hosts Kirby Wilbur and John Carlson. I worked for them at the time. In full disclosure, I worked at KVI at the time, so I was very familiar with this case when it went before the state Supreme Court. So he brought that up, saying there's no reason the PDC should be wasting its time.
And they were supporting a an initiative, and they were talking about on their radio show, and the same machine tried to go after them and say, "Oh, you don't really, if you're a journalist, you don't really have a First Amendment right to your own opinions. You can't say anything on your show." And it went to court, and they won. They're trying that same play now with Brandi Kruse. They're trying to say, "Well, Brandi Kruse can't have her own opinion. It must be paid." And so the complaint against us, they filed like 159 issues where they said somehow she'd given us something. We got questions from the PDC that said, "Have you ever paid Brandi Kruse?" Our answer is no, we've never paid Brandi Kruse. Let's Go Washington's never paid her for anything. They said, "Have you ever paid anyone else that has paid Brandi Kruse?" And the answer to that is no. And that question is really interesting to me because I suspect the reason we're getting that question is because that's what the other side does. They pay people to do it. So why are they asking us? It had never occurred to me to do that.
So it certainly seems the commission, the Public Disclosure Commission, will be busy with all of this and perhaps more to come. I'm told in the days and weeks ahead. Obviously, an important election coming up in November. So maybe that's why there's going to be a lot of this going, from either side uh, back and forth, but it will keep the commission busy.